My mentally ill wife crashed our car for an insurance claim, but accidentally unalived someone, then went totally insane during the prosecution process. A while ago, my wife Amanda got the brilliant idea to make a lot of cash by crashing our car and writing it off for an insurance claim. I told her no, as this was our only car and we could not afford to lose it, but a few days later she came home bawling her eyes out. I asked what was wrong and why didn't she drive home considering she took the car, and after she calmed down she explained, well, she took our car for grocery shopping, but actually drove to the nearest traffic light on the main road. She suddenly accelerated at a red light and drove into an oncoming vehicle at top speed. She somehow wasn't injured, but the other vehicle had a 52-year-old woman and her 19-year-old daughter, both of whom were unalived. Immediately upon impact, she jumped out and fled the scene on foot. She had done it for the insurance money, she said. We needed it, she said, but something went terribly wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She said she didn't mean for it to happen like this, and that she panicked. I don't know what her thought process was, but this isn't the first time Amanda has acted like this. She'd always been impulsive, but mainly with little things like splurging on clothes or planning a random trip. But crashing our car, taking the life of two innocents, and fleeing the scene wasn't on my bingo card. The first time she started showing impulsive behavior was when we were fresh in our relationship. We had been dating for about a year when she decided, out of the blue, to quit her stable job at the marketing firm to pursue her dream of becoming a freelance photographer. She came home one evening and excitedly told me she had handed in her resignation that day. I was confused at first. I asked if everything was okay and what made her do such a thing. She said that she's diving 100% into her passion. She talked about it in passing, but only seemed to take interest in it after seeing a woman's YouTube channel who travels the world as a freelance photographer, and she said she wanted to be like her. She didn't even own a camera. When I tried to ask her why so suddenly, she explained that she'd been thinking about it for a while and that she couldn't keep working at a job that she hated. She also said that the time that she spends at the firm is time that she could be putting into her business ventures. She said she was too tired to come home from work every day and try to practice photography. I admired her courage and how spontaneous she was, but I couldn't shake the worry of how she was going to help around the house at the back of my mind. We had bills to pay, and our finances weren't exactly reliable. Still, I wanted to support her dreams, so I smiled, kissed her, and told her I believed in her. The following months were tough. Without her steady income, we had to tighten our belts. Amanda threw herself into her new career, but work was slow to come by. I could see the strain it was putting on her, and in turn, it put a strain on us. I picked up extra shifts at the warehouse to make ends meet, and a lot of the time, I came home exhausted. My feet hurt, and I felt dizzy from the fatigue. But despite the stress and sleepless nights, I didn't mind it at first. I loved her, and I wanted to see her happy. Watching her light up when she finally booked a gig or captured a stunning photo made it all worth it. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that her impulsiveness was just part of who she was, one of the reasons I fell in love with her in the first place. However, as the financial pressure mounted and her career struggled to take off, the initial excitement faded. Anyways, the police arrived not long after. I watched in disbelief as they charged her and attempted to escort her out of our apartment. She resisted, however, screaming and thrashing wildly. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. My wife, the woman I loved, was being dragged away in handcuffs. She kicked and screamed, saying she was framed and that she couldn't go to jail. That rage soon turned into begging and pleading. It took 2 officers to get her into the vehicle, and she banged her head on the glass as they drove off. I could hear her screams through the glass and her snot smeared on the window. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, stunned, as they took her away. The silence that followed was deafening. The days that followed were a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what was about to happen. The days leading up to the trial were some of the hardest of my life. Every morning, I would ride the bus to the courthouse. Each time I rode the bus, it was a constant reminder of what Amanda had done. I remember the first day of the trial vividly. Amanda was brought in wearing the orange jumpsuit. Her wrists were in cuffs. Seeing her like that was like a punch to the gut. I tried to look her in the eye to offer some silent reassurance, but she stared straight ahead. She was in her own world. Sitting in that courtroom was torment. The prosecutor's voice dragged on, detailing the events of that day with clinical precision. Riding the bus back home each evening was the worst part. The ride was long and lonely. It gave me too much time to think. I hardly slept during the trial. My nights were spent tossing and turning. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that crushed car and Amanda's wild eyes, as she told me what she'd done, was shown clear as day. It was during a particularly grueling day in court that I realized just how much of a toll this had taken on me. The next day, the courtroom was silent, the air heavy with anticipation as the prosecution made their case. Amanda sat beside her lawyer, and she kept looking around the room frantically. When the prosecutor was speaking about the evidence they found, she stood up. Her voice was piercing. She got up up and pointed at the prosecutor. She screamed, saying that he was lying. She said this whole thing is a setup, and they're all in on it. The judge looked confused, and Amanda kept screaming, saying he didn't understand because they were all plotting against her. This time she was pointing towards her head. The judge banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but Amanda was beyond control. Amanda said that she heard them, and that they were working with the prosecutor. She said the voices are trying to control her and are trying to ruin her life. Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but it was no use. Amanda's eyes were wild. She yelled again, saying to the judge that he couldn't trust them. She began looking around the room as if searching for an ally. "They're part of the conspiracy, all of them," she exclaimed. The judge ordered a recess, and the bailiffs moved to escort Amanda out. She fought them, screaming incoherently about plots and voices, her accusations growing more bizarre by the second. "You're all part of it," she shrieked. "You're trying to drive me insane." Her lawyer, looking harried and exhausted, addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client is clearly not mentally fit to stand trial. I request an immediate psychiatric evaluation." The judge's patience had clearly worn thin. He nodded and agreed. He said we would reconvene when she had an evaluation. The next few days were a blur of medical assessments and legal debates. Her lawyer argued passionately that Amanda was not responsible for her actions and that she was suffering from a severe mental breakdown. The prosecution pushed back, but it was clear to everyone in the room that Amanda was not in her right mind. Finally, the judge made his ruling. He found her not guilty by reason of insanity and committed her to the psychiatric ward for treatment. Amanda's outbursts had taken their toll on everyone involved. As she was led away, she was still muttering about conspiracies and voices. The first time I visited Amanda in the psychiatric ward, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she recognize me? Would she be lucid? As I walked down the sterile, white hallway, my heart pounded in my chest. When I finally saw her, she looked almost like her old self, sitting in a common room with other patients. She was reading a book. She looked up as I got closer, and for a moment her face lit up. We greeted each other, and I told her how much I'd missed her. We talked for a while, and despite the confusion that clouded her mind, there were glimpses of the woman I fell in love with. She laughed at my jokes, though the laughter had a hint of hysteria. She asked about home and about the little things that used to matter so much to us. For a moment, I thought that she could get better and get out of there. But as the weeks passed, our visits grew more strained. The confusion she had soon turned to suspicion. One afternoon, as we sat in the visitor's room, she turned to me. Her expression was hard. She started asking me questions like why I didn't lie for her, and she started to sound angry. I was taken aback. I told her that I couldn't lie to her because they knew everything already. She yelled at me that I could have at least tried and said that it wasn't her fault. She said I didn't support her. I told her that I was supporting her now. I came to visit her at the psych ward as often as I could, which was almost every day. Considering I no longer had a car, I thought I was doing a pretty good job. She told me that being there for her wasn't enough. She said I should have done more and protected her. With each visit, her hostility grew. She accused me of not caring, of abandoning her. She questioned why I didn't cover for her, why I didn't make up a story to save her. Her paranoia got worse, and the accusations became more and more wild. One day she asked me, "You're part of it, aren't you?" She said that I was a part of the conspiracy against her and that I wanted this to happen. I reassured her that this was the farthest thing from what I wanted and that I loved her. I just didn't know what to do. She screamed and said that I never knew what to do. She stood up so quickly that the chair toppled over. The nurses rushed in, and I was escorted out as she continued to shout. Her words turned into incoherent sobs. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a crushing weight of helplessness. The woman I loved was slipping further away, lost in a world of delusions and anger, and there was nothing I could do to reach her. I wondered how much longer I could keep coming back. Each visit left me more heartbroken than the last until, finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The last time I saw her, she was a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her eyes, once full of life and love, were now empty and distant. She didn't even recognize me. As I left the psychiatric ward, I knew it was the last time I would ever see her. I tried to move on with my life, but the weight of what had happened hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't escape the memories, the guilt, the feeling that I had somehow failed her. The woman I loved was lost to me forever. The first step was letting go of the life we had built together. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary if I was ever going to heal. I sold all our belongings, the furniture, the TV, even the little knickknacks we had collected over the years. Each item I sold felt like I was leaving behind a piece of my old life. It was a painful but liberating process. With the money I made, I decided to get myself a car. Nothing fancy, just something to get me around. I found an old clunker at a junkyard, a beat-up sedan with a lot of potential. Fixing up that car became my new project. I spent hours in the garage, tinkering with the engine, replacing parts, and slowly bringing it back to life. The work was therapeutic. When I finally got the engine to roar to life, I felt a spark of pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. That car, with its scratched paint and dented doors, was a highlight. With money tight, I knew I couldn't afford to keep the apartment on my own. I started looking for cheaper options and eventually found a shelter that offered temporary housing. It wasn't ideal, but it was a roof over my head, and it gave me the chance to save up some money. Moving into the shelter was humbling. The stark, shared living space faces were a far cry from the home Amanda and I had shared, but I reminded myself that this was temporary. I sold off everything else I didn't need: clothes, electronics, anything that wasn't essential. Living with just the basics was surprisingly freeing. It's been months now since I last saw her. I've tried to pick up the pieces of my life, to find some sense of normalcy, but it's not easy. The memory of that day, of her wild eyes and frantic confession, haunts me. I often wonder if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have prevented all of this. But in the end, I know that some things are beyond our control.